Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to Legal AF with Court Accountability Action. My name is Lisa Graves, and I am so excited to be here with one of my dear colleagues, Ansev Demirhan, who is an expert in looking at the right-wing infrastructure, in particular, that right-wing infrastructure that has sought to make it harder for Americans to have access to abortion. And we're here today to talk to you a bit about what's happening in Wisconsin, which is also a bellwether for other states in terms of the dark money and right-wing money coming in to Wisconsin, the Wisconsin Supreme Court race, to affect who sits on the Wisconsin Supreme Court and thus affect whether the people of Wisconsin will have access to abortion or whether abortion will be banned. So, Ansev, thank you so much for joining me. Can you tell us a little bit about what you're seeing in Wisconsin, any of the groups or trends or big players you want to flag?
Sure. Hi, Lisa. Thanks so much for having me on. So I'll just start off by giving a brief overview of the national and local anti-abortion groups we see throwing their weight behind Schimel and what they've done so far to show their support for him. So I'll start out with two national anti-abortion groups and their PACs. So the first is Women Speak Out, and this is the anti-abortion group Susan B. Anthony Pro-Life America's PAC. And despite the name Women Speak Out, it is funded almost entirely by one man, anti-abortion Illinois shipping billionaire Dick Uilhlein. So far, Women Speak Out has spent about $120,000 on canvassing efforts, but it's not unreasonable to anticipate that they could spend more, given that the PAC spent about $2 million backing Dan Kelly for the court in 2023.
Can I interrupt you there about
Sure.
this group, because that it's just wild to me. And when we first discovered that together, the fact that there's a group going out in advertising and outreach calling itself Women Speak Out, and its main funder is one dude, one super rich guy who inherited, significant wealth from a brewing fortune, and then with the support of his dad, parlayed some of that family wealth into a company that sells boxes and office supplies. And then during the pandemic, his wealth grew enormously. He's a kind of an older guy. And he, as you point out, has invested millions of dollars in trying to capture the Wisconsin Supreme Court. And he is an anti-choice billionaire. But the numbers are staggering. The percentage of the money that has come from groups that he funds, that he's a primary funder of, into Women Speak Out. Can you share with us the dollar figures or the percentage on that, Ansev?
No, it is staggering. I think it's something like 96% right now of that PAC is funded by Dick Uilhlein, which is a considerable amount of money and a gigantic share, right? And so really they are doing the work of trying to push forward Uilhlein's regressive agenda. And that regressive agenda does obviously overlap with Susan B. Anthony Pro-Life America's anti-abortion agenda, but it is kind of really significant that there's this one man who personally will never be impacted when it comes to his personal autonomy and reproductive choices, really utilizing this Women Speak Out PAC as if it's this grassroots, organic, women-led movement to do his bidding.
Yeah, it's extraordinary. And the other thing that, as someone who, like you, has studied history, although I don't have a PhD like you do, Ansev, but, the primary group, the not PAC, but the other part of that group, that Susan B. Anthony group that then added after Dobbs Pro-Life America, because their vision is to block abortion everywhere in the country, not just Wisconsin, but every single state, no matter what. Also, the fact that they named their group many years ago after one of the leaders of the American women's feminist movement, Susan B. Anthony, to try to give themselves historical weight while they embark on this agenda that fundamentally affects women's equality and women's autonomy and the ability of people to determine their destiny, their future in terms of when and if they want to have children. So can you tell us a little bit more about Susan B. Anthony? The SBA PLA, which I
could tell you about Susan B. Anthony, but I will stick to the anti-abortion group. So Susan B. Anthony Pro-Life America is probably one of the most powerful national anti-abortion groups, and they have the support of some anti-abortion juggernauts like Sean Feeler, Leonard Leo, Dick Uilhlein, backing their efforts, right? And so we know that in the 2024 election cycle, they spent and boasted about spending $92 million basically going into states and canvassing and making sure that they got the election results that they were seeking. $92 million is a substantial amount of money to do some serious influencing in states, right? And so we know that they are more than just making sure that abortion is not available nationally. They are inserting themselves into state politics in big ways. And the first time they actually tried to do this, that was post-Dobbs, that's really significant and important, they tried to be a bit more covert about their operations. And this was in the context of Ohio, where they were utilizing the front group Protect Women Ohio to kind of cosplay that there was this organic movement against Ohio's Amendment 1, which would enshrine, thankfully, successfully, abortion access for Ohioans. And for a long time, we didn't realize who was funding that initiative, who was behind it. But lo and behold, it was Susan B. Anthony Pro-Life America, and also Leonard Leo's Concord Fund all spent heavily in that effort as well. We're talking like tens of millions of dollars.
Yeah, that was such an important set of reporting that went out about that. And I know that you looked at it so closely, Ansev. I feel so lucky to get the chance to work with you on these issues. And I really appreciate your raising that, how there were front groups deployed in Ohio to try to convince the people of Ohio not to protect access to abortion after the U.S. Supreme Court overturned Roe versus Wade in the Dobbs decision based on that multi-decade campaign that Leonard Leo was instrumental to capture the U.S. Supreme Court in order to destroy and overturn Roe versus Wade and access to abortion as a federal constitutional matter. And then, of course, after Samuel Alito in that ruling says, we're going to leave it to the states, which means basically leaving people at the menace of people like Governor Greg Abbott in Texas pursuing women or trying to block a woman, from getting access to abortion that her doctor recommends based on the her health and what's happening reproductively. You have of course, the next stage is to try to ban abortion anywhere and everywhere, or to, like in the case of Wisconsin, try to get an 1849 law, a law that was passed 175 years ago when women could not even vote in the state, a year after Wisconsin even became a state, to basically get that law in effect to ban abortion access in Wisconsin. So that's part of what's happening. The Wisconsin Supreme Court right now is considering that case, but even if this court right now ruled against that 1849 law, what we've seen in other states like North Carolina is when some of these Republican-aligned judges get in power, they just reverse the previous court. They don't care what the precedent is. They don't care, how illegitimate that looks in terms of, just treating the court like a political position that they get to capture and then decimate people's rights. That's what North Carolina did on voting rights. The North Carolina Supreme Court did on voting rights. They get in power and they reverse the previous court. So even if this court currently were to block that 1849 abortion ban, if there were a change in personnel at the court, they could reverse course immediately and impose that abortion ban against the popular will of the people of Wisconsin. So I'm wondering what other groups in Wisconsin you've been looking at, or you've seen rise up and are spending money in the state to influence the Wisconsin Supreme Court.
Sure. Yes, of course. So there's another national anti-abortion group worth mentioning, and that is the American Principles Project and their PAC. So the American Principles Project PAC, so much alliteration, is related to the anti-choice, anti-LGBTQ group American Principles Project, and this PAC
I have to stop.
So many things.
It's like Peter picked a peck of pickles.
Yes. Did I do it?
APP PAC. You did it so great, Ansev, but it's a tongue twister. So yes,
it is. But I don't want to throw a bunch of acronyms at people. Just bear with me. I will start saying the group from here on out as I focus in on this particular PAC. So this PAC, APP PAC, is effectively Uilhlein as well. So of the more than 12.7 million in contributions the PAC reported receiving from 2023 to 2024, more than 11.2 million can be attributed to Uilhlein. And we've seen the PAC so far spend about $500,000 on digital advertisements attacking Susan Crawford. Again, this is another Uilhlein funded PAC that spent big in the 2023 race in support of Kelly. So it's not impossible that we aren't going to see more money thrown into the race from this PAC in the next 10 days or so. And it's, not just the national anti-abortion groups throwing their weight behind Schimel, but also local Wisconsin anti-abortion groups, which, is not surprising, but definitely still worth discussing. So the first group, go ahead.
I interrupted you 3 times now. I apologize, my friend.
No, it's okay.
Can you just tell us a little bit more about APP PAC? You mentioned Sean Filer earlier, that hedge fund guy. Obviously, he's a private citizen, although he's injected himself into these electoral politics. And doesn't he have really strong views, not just against abortion, but also against gay rights and more? And so APP PAC or APP as well is certainly tied to him, and he certainly has the right to have those views or have his own religious views. But what I think part of what we're seeing here in other places is people trying to impose their personal views on others through capturing these levers of power. Can you tell us a little bit more about some of the things he said or done?
Certainly. I mean, so Sean Filer is someone who is incredibly wedded to using his substantial capital to push his regressive, religiously informed agenda. And like you said, it is totally fine and it should be protected that you should have your religious views. However, there is this need for him through his funding to impose that religious view and regressive view on the majority of Americans. And those views are definitely seated in anti-trans, anti-gay sentiments, as well as anti-choice sentiments. And we have seen I think this is incredibly telling. He was interviewed once and asked, who are your mentors, your philanthropic mentors? And he listed Leonard Leo. And most people are familiar at this point how regressive and how steadfast Leo's anti-abortion agenda has been. And so for Filer to identify him as one of those mentors is incredibly telling. But yes, I think once upon a time he had said something to the effect of being gay or gay marriage is one of the true moral deficits in this society, in our American society, which is just incredibly appalling and doesn't, suggests to me that there's potential for him to kind of resurface his efforts against marriage equality, which was a prime focus of him prior to Obergefell.
Yeah, it really is astonishing. I saw reports that he went to CPAC Brazil a few years back, the big right-wing CPAC operation, and he basically showed a Soviet flag, a Cuban flag, and the rainbow flag, and claimed that these were the most dangerous ideologies in the world. So the idea that people would be able to marry the person they love, that we would have marriage equality in America, is something that he has, staunchly opposed. But let's talk about the other groups you were going to get to, some of the local groups. Sorry about that. Thank you for your
No, don't apologize. Don't apologize at all.
Your information.
Yeah. So there are two groups I just want to briefly discuss that are Wisconsin-based anti-abortion groups. And the first is Wisconsin Family Action. So this is a state affiliate of Focus on the Family, which was founded by televangelist James Dobson in the mid-1970s. And the group has reached out to Wisconsin voters. They've asked for 300 volunteers to send out handwritten mailers in order to, quote, flip our state court from liberal to conservative. And then just this week, the group announced a 6-figure multimedia advocacy campaign in support of Schimel. This campaign is intended to target about 250,000 voters with a specific focus on conservative and Christian voters. And then the other group that's worth mentioning is Pro-Life Wisconsin. And this is the last group. I promise I'm done after this. This group is particularly extreme in that it opposes all abortions. That means no exceptions for the life and health of the mother, no exceptions for rape and incest. And the group also opposes birth control and IVF. So while this group, Pro-Life Wisconsin, has not officially endorsed Schimel, both the group and its leaders have shown their support for Schimel in other ways. So, for example, Pro-Life Wisconsin has donated money to Schimel's campaign. And then in their January newsletter, they declared that the easiest road to protecting preborn life in Wisconsin was to elect Brad Schimel to the court.
Wow.
Matt Sandy, who is the group's chief lobbyist, gave a TV interview in which he endorsed Schimel. And then Dan Miller, the group's state director, also urged people to vote for Schimel on social media.
Wow.
And I think just for those who are paying attention, some important context about these two groups is that they, along with Wisconsin Right to Life, unsuccessfully argued that they had an interest in 2 cases involving reproductive rights that are slated for the Wisconsin Supreme Court this year. The court ruled that these groups did not have standing to join those cases. So instead, the groups filed an amicus brief together and Call v. Ermansky. And this is the case that will determine whether the state's 1849 abortion restrictions can be applied to ban abortion access in the state. So even if they're not officially endorsing Schimel, they are definitely throwing their weight behind him as their, as the candidate.
Wow. Well, this is just fascinating, Ansev. It's so hard to track the money, to see what's happening. I think the prediction is that this will be a Supreme Court race here in Wisconsin that will set national records. Last time around in 2023, there was the tally, although it's hard to tell because some of this money is called C4 money, not just fully disclosed. But the tally last time, the estimate was that more than $50 million was spent on this Wisconsin Supreme Court race. In that race, Dan Kelly lost, who was backed by a number of these groups. And Judge Janet won that race. Here we are just 2 years later in 2025, and we're seeing estimates that this race in Wisconsin could end up costing up to $100 million, and money's coming in from other folks like Elon Musk, other Dick Uilhlein groups. Charles Koch's operation is active here. I just wonder if there's anything else you want to share about the sort of the trend, any trends you're seeing about the pushback against anti-abortion efforts in the country, or any other indications of hope or thoughts about this fight, this moment we're in, not just this Wisconsin Supreme Court situation, but kind of generally. It's interesting because Trump, in essence, has tried to say that he does not, want to do more to restrict abortion, but then he's been really, very friendly with the anti-abortion groups nationally. And the Project 2025 agenda has been rolled out in lots of ways, not yet on all the ways that they have yet planned for on abortion. But it seems like where in most states where people have a chance to vote on the issue of abortion, not candidates, but on the issue of abortion, like Ohio, Kansas, Florida, a majority of people want to protect reproductive rights. Am I correct in that assessment of where the lay of the land generally?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. So of the 16 times that enshrining abortion access into state constitutions have been up for vote, 13 have been successful. 13 states have been successful in this. We know that it is an issue that gets people out to vote, and we know that the majority of Americans support reproductive access and acknowledge that abortion healthcare is necessary healthcare. We know not only that most Americans support reproductive freedom, the right to choose, but that most Wisconsinites, 63% of registered voters to be precise, want more reproductive access than the 1849 law would afford them. And so that, I think, is really incredibly telling.
Ansev, thank you so much for coming on Legal AF, the Midas Touch Network, this effort with Court Accountability Action. Please join us again. People who are watching this, please subscribe, please share, please spread the word about, what's happening in our states and some of this big money that's being spent to try to influence the policies that affect our lives. Really appreciate having you on, Ansev. Thank you so much. And we'll see you all again soon.
Yeah, thank you.
In collaboration with the Midas Touch Network, we just launched the Legal AF YouTube channel. Help us build this pro-democracy channel where I'll be curating the top stories at the intersection of law and politics. Go to YouTube now and free subscribe at Legal AF MTN. That's at Legal AF MTN.